Do you ever get to the point when in your makeup where you're like, I can't remember what I do next? Because right now I'm there. Hi, my name is EK. Welcome to my channel Explain, giving you the Wikipedia plot summary of the past. Yes, I am back and I'm ready to tackle the behemoth of English history, the Tudors. Again, I have already filmed this, but the bit for Anne of Cleves didn't record, and I was like, she's been through enough for me to just like lay more trials and tribulations upon her, so I am redoing it. So with the Tudors, like, the chances of you not knowing anything about the Tudors are probably pretty small. The Tudors, along with World War II, are kind of like inescapable parts of the UK national history and its kind of psyche. But the Tudors happen to also be really, really interesting, so I'm going to tell you about them anyway. I've lost my eyebrow pencil. It was right in front of me the whole time, so let's just move on. This is going to be in 2 parts as a minimum, and a lot happens, so I am just going to get on with it. But firstly, a couple of trigger warnings. I will try and reiterate the trigger warning just before I talk about like the triggering bit, but just as a heads up, I want to give a trigger warning for mentions of miscarriage, and then 2 mentions of CSA, but as I said, I will kind of insert a little trigger warning just before it happens. So kicking off in 1509 with Henry VIII's succession to the throne at the age of 17 after his father Henry VII died. Henry VII is the first Tudor monarch. I kind of outlined the basic biographical details of his life in my last vague history video, but unfortunately Henry VII happens to be comparably quite boring, so I'm just going to skip over him. My apologies.
Sorry to this man.
Shortly after becoming king, Henry VIII marries the Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon, who is actually the widow of his older brother Arthur, who had died in 1502. Catherine claims that her and Arthur never actually consummated their marriage, which means it should be pretty easy to have it formally annulled and kind of set aside by the church. Catherine's emblem is the pomegranate, which is actually a symbol of fertility, but unfortunately, despite at least half a dozen pregnancies, by 1518, the only surviving child that Catherine and Henry have is a daughter named Mary. Now, even before Henry VIII became the heir to his father's throne, so while his elder brother Arthur was still alive, Henry was still a prince, and so he received an education as would befit a prince. This means that he would have been knowledgeable about theology, and certainly the impression that lots of historians get is that he was quite scholarly and intelligent. Alongside this, the 16th century in most of the world, but certainly in Western Europe, was an intensely religious age. Christianity, Catholicism in this case, was dominating almost every aspect of life. So it does follow that if Henry VIII genuinely believed that the reason he hadn't had a surviving male heir with his wife Catherine was because God disapproved of it, this would be something that would distress him. I think it's easy to become cynical and assume that he just kind of wanted to get rid of Catherine so that he could get it on with Anne Boleyn, and I mean, he didn't not want to get rid of Catherine so that he could get it on with Anne Boleyn, but I think it's probably more layered and complex than perhaps we give credit in the 21st century. The conclusion that Henry begins to draw is that maybe Catherine and Arthur's marriage was consummated and therefore could not be easily set aside or annulled in the eyes of God. So Henry thinks that maybe God is mad at him, and that's why he cannot have any living sons with his wife Catherine.
I've connected the 2 dots.
You didn't connect shit, but
I've connected them.
However, pivotal to how these events kind of play out is the backdrop of the Protestant Reformation. That isn't to say that without the Reformation, Catherine wouldn't have instigated some kind of separation from Catherine. Catherine wouldn't have instigated separation from Catherine. Catherine was married to Catherine, was she? Oh my God. But it certainly was a key pivot upon which all of these factors rested. The Reformation is not something that's kind of easy to sum up as like an aside in a video, but I will give it a go. Basically, in 1517, a monk named Martin Luther prints a lot of things criticising the church. People have been criticising the church both from without and within the church since it kind of began, but Luther's ideas took flight in part to the fact that he did print them. In the 15th century, so just before Luther printed his ideas, the printing press of Western Europe had been invented. There was print already happening in different parts of the world, I think specifically China, but in the middle of the 15th century, Johannes Gutenberg Gutenberg invents a European one, which means Luther is able to print his ideas and get them read by a large number of people. The crux of these ideas, at least that are relevant for our topic today, are that Luther doesn't think there should be a pope. Luther thinks that the pope and the bishops are not essential to salvation, and instead you can access your kind of eternal reward in the afterlife just by being faithful. Now, the papacy, along with being the arbiter of faith in Western Christendom, he is also your go-to guy for annulling marriages and approving marriages where the two people are too closely related. And I understand people being like, ew, why would they want to marry somebody who was like related to them? But because of the way the church saw marriage, it wasn't just about people that you were actually like biologically related to. It also sometimes counted if you were like married to somebody from that family. So like if your grandma died and your grandpa remarried somebody, you might not be able to marry anybody else in that family because you were seen as like related through affinity, even though it was just through marriage. But on the whole, it's also like, yeah, don't marry your cousins. This apparently is not a message that most of the royal family today have listened to.
You so crazy. I think I want to have your baby.
So whether Henry and Catherine's marriage was valid or not, like, we will never know. But in the 1520s, Henry decides that it is not valid because one bit of the Bible agrees with that. Previously, another bit of the Bible had agreed with their marriage being valid, but he decides to ignore that bit for now. And he starts badgering the Pope to grant him a divorce from Catherine. But the Pope says no. He does this for a few reasons, but one of the reasons I would think was significant in his mind is that Catherine's nephew was the Holy Roman Emperor. His name is Charles V. He was not known as Charles V when he was born. He was called Charles, but then he became the 5th Charles to be the Holy Roman Emperor. Charles V's mother, Joanna, was Catherine's sister. We can assume that Charles, the Holy Roman Emperor, does not want his aunt to be divorced against her will, nor would he necessarily want his cousin, who he's floated as marrying several times. What was it I just said about the royal family and marrying their cousins? But if Henry does obtain his divorce from Catherine, then their daughter Mary will be declared illegitimate. So the Pope, with all this in mind, kind of... I'm glad they're having fun. Right, where the fuck was I? The Pope. Yes, I was with the Pope. So the Pope, likely mindful of this, says to Henry, yeah, not happening. And back in England, Henry is looking at his marriage, he's looking at his lack of sons, and he's hearing about this movement in Europe that says actually the Pope isn't necessary, and the cogs are turning. Long story short, Henry VIII tells the Pope he can do one and makes himself the head of the Church of England. This means that he gets to decide who can and who can't have a divorce, and shockingly, he grants Henry VIII, the King of England, his divorce. And now moving forward to the six-fingered elephant in the room. The divorce is sealed by the early 1530s, and Henry VIII immediately marries his longtime crush, an upstart young woman called Anne Boleyn. Anne has steadfastly refused to be Henry's mistress. She doesn't want a quick "how's your father" over the prie-dieu. She wants to be the queen.
Do you want to be a queen?
No. I want to be the queen.
And now she's got her wish. The pair get married secretly at first in November of 1532 and then officially in the January of 1533. In the July of that year, Anne is crowned queen in Westminster, and in the September she gives birth to a baby. But unfortunately this baby is a girl, and that's bad luck because Henry's already got one of them. The baby is named Elizabeth, and everybody says, oh, don't worry, next time it will be a boy, but unfortunately there isn't a next time. In August 1534, Anne has a miscarriage, and then she has another miscarriage in the January 1536, and this is just after the eventual death of Catherine of Aragon, who had kind of been on like an internal exile, and she hadn't been able to see her daughter for several years, but until the very end she insisted that A, her marriage to Arthur had not been consummated, B, that her marriage to Henry VIII was completely valid, and that 3,
it is the confidence with how I say A, B and 3 for me. Like, I really committed. I committed to that wholeheartedly.
she was the one and only rightful Queen Consort of England. You would think that Henry might kind of pluck for another divorce, but even as late as the April of 1536, he is sticking by Anne. He makes quite a big fuss around the fact that Charles V, the nephew of Catherine of Aragon that I mentioned earlier, isn't recognising Anne as like the rightful queen. So even at this juncture, he wasn't abandoning Anne by any means. However, Anne makes another enemy, a far more dangerous enemy than the Holy Roman Emperor, and that is Thomas Cromwell. Thomas is a lawyer and he works for Henry VIII as kind of a glorified fixer. Or not very glorified, I think just a fixer. He's like a more principled Dominic Cummings.
Hi, me again. Apologies. I just want to add a quick qualification to this, that by saying that Thomas Cromwell was a more principled Dominic Cummings, I'm implying that Dominic Cummings has any principles whatsoever, which I can tell you, and I'm sure you are already aware, is not the case.
So prior to this, Thomas had actually been kind of in the pro-Anne faction of the court, and as opposed to like the pro-Catherine faction. But he falls out with Anne partly over religious reform and who should be benefiting from the enormous wealth of the Catholic Church in England that is now being appropriated by the new Church of England. Ultimately, Cromwell engineers her downfall, and in May of 1536, Anne Boleyn becomes the first Queen of England to be convicted and executed for treason. A charge of which, like the other charges against her, she was almost certainly innocent. Less than a fortnight later, Henry marries wife number 3. His next bride is called Jane Seymour, and she is actually Anne Boleyn's second cousin. They both shared a great-grandmother called Elizabeth Cheney. Jane, like Anne, is quite amenable to Henry's reformist policies, but she's also a bit quieter than Anne and more careful to toe the party line. Nonetheless, Jane does try and reconcile Henry to his two daughters who have been declared illegitimate. In October of 1537, Jane gives birth, and finally it's a boy. They call him Edward, and Henry is very, very excited. The excitement proves pretty short-lived because Jane dies shortly after giving birth. Henry's gutted because not only had he not got tired of Jane yet, he was also very hype about having a son. But time to move on, and he looks for bride number 4. So this time Henry goes continental and marries his second European bride, a woman called Anne of Cleves. Anne is a Lutheran, which is kind of like a specific flavour of Protestantism, and the marriage is arranged by Henry's aforementioned ride or die, Thomas Cromwell. But when Anne arrives in England, Henry kind of isn't really that into her. There's a lot of kind of like, oh well, she must have been really ugly, which we don't really have any evidence for whatsoever. Henry was getting a bit older. There's kind of suggestions that he might have been struggling with impotence, but the fact is he doesn't really like Anne. So Henry's pals suggest to Anne of Cleves that she should accept a divorce, and as she has seen what Henry has done to his previous unwanted wives, she very sensibly agrees. So Anne agrees. She says, yes, that's a wonderful idea actually. And as a result, she is kind of treated with honour, given an income and a place at court, and is known henceforth, kind of weirdly, as the king's sister. And she, like Jane Seymour, also encourages Henry to look more kindly upon his two daughters. Anne of Cleves then survives this ordeal, and she eventually outlives Henry by a decade. But Thomas Cromwell doesn't. He gets blamed for organising this failed marriage and is eventually executed in 1540. Meanwhile, Henry is back on the market. His 5th queen is a very young woman called Catherine Howard. She is a first cousin of Anne Boleyn and a second cousin of Jane Seymour. As an aside, I saw somebody kind of express surprise that so many of Henry's wives were related, and it's like, have you seen a family tree of the English royal family, both in the 16th century and today? It is more surprising to me that so many of his wives were English. At this time, the principal aim of many royal marriages was to cement alliances with foreign countries, as we saw with Catherine of Aragon and also with Henry's two sisters who married the King of France and the King of Scotland respectively. Anyway, Catherine Howard is much younger than Henry VIII. We don't really know how old she is. There's kind of a ballpark figure given, but she was very young. After they marry, rumours about her past service, essentially that she may have been pre-contracted or betrothed to somebody else, but this pre-contract seems to actually have been a pretty unpleasant situation where a music teacher abused her when she was a child. What seals her fate, however, is alleged dalliances with some young courtiers, and that is considered treason, so she is executed just like her first cousin Anne Boleyn at the Tower of London. Finally, in 1543, Henry marries Catherine Parr, who is very scholarly. She actually publishes a book in her own name, I think the first Queen of England to publish in her own name, and it's a translation of some religious texts. If you have been following the rhyme, you know that Catherine Parr survives Henry, and Henry dies in 1547 at the age of 55. Catherine remarries to a man called Thomas Seymour, and young Elizabeth, which would have been Catherine's stepdaughter, is in their care for a while before Catherine forces her out, as Seymour has a slightly unhealthy interest in Elizabeth. Seymour may have actually floated the idea of trying to marry Elizabeth at one point, but obviously that never came to fruition. In the summer of 1548, Catherine gives birth to a daughter with Seymour called Mary, but unfortunately Catherine develops complications and dies just over a week later. Mary Seymour kind of disappears from the historical record a couple of years later, and there are theories about maybe she had survived, but they are as exciting as they are unlikely. Back to the throne, and Henry VIII is survived by 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth and Edward. Mary and Elizabeth would both be behind Edward in the line of succession due to their gender, but they've also spent their lives like in this revolving door of legitimacy, as their father kind of waxed and waned depending on how much he hated their respective mothers at any given moment. Now, Mary is still pretty staunchly Catholic, as her mother was. Elizabeth is a little more circumspect, but basically Protestant, but Edward is very Protestant indeed. Their father had obviously kind of effected this break from Rome, and he is seen rightly as the instigator of England's Reformation, but I would wager that Henry was primarily interested in the secular benefits of Luther's movement, like being able to grant his own divorce and appropriate the enormous wealth of the church, rather than a wholehearted spiritual devotion to the new kind of Protestant a la mode. It is amazing, however, that throughout history you can see how quickly spiritual devotions tend to marry with secular ambition. But Edward and his government, under the regency of his maternal uncle Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, are very more Protestant, and they begin entrenching and intensifying the Reformation in England. At this time, Scotland is still Catholic and is also being ruled by regents on behalf of Edward's 4-year-old first cousin once removed, Mary Stuart. Mary is the granddaughter of Edward's late aunt, Margaret Tudor, who I've talked about in a previous video, and is one of my favourite historical figures, not least because she was chubby, ginger, and moved to Scotland. God, how much fucking bronzer do I want to slap on today? A lot, apparently. France is also sticking with this Catholicism thing, so England is the odd one out. This is like as far as it goes. Contouring. That's it. Done. In 1552, however, Edward VI dies at the age of 15. He hadn't married, and he certainly didn't have any children, illegitimate or otherwise. So the wheel turns again, as next in line is his eldest half-sister, Mary Tudor, who is Catholic. Edward knows that Mary will return England to Rome given half a chance, so he sets about not letting that happen. So he decides to circumvent both of his half-sisters, both Mary and Elizabeth, in something that he calls the device for the succession. Now, the key figure in this device is a woman called Jane Grey. Lady Jane Grey's mother was Edward's first cousin, and she was the daughter of Mary Tudor, who was Henry VIII's youngest sister. So initially, this device for the succession leaves the throne to Jane's heirs male, her male children essentially. But shortly before the young monarch dies, 2 words are added in, which is "and her." So instead of it being Jane Grey's heirs male, it's Jane Grey and her heirs male, which means that Jane Grey is his designated Protestant successor. Now, no spoilers, but shit goes down, and it is on that cliffhanger which I will leave you. That is part 1 of the Tudors, taking us from 1509 to 1552, and we will pick up with the aftermath of Edward's attempts to change the succession. I hope you've enjoyed this video. My apologies that the lighting is kind of a bit off. It's the middle of the day, but the window is behind me, so I have to put all these artificial lights, and I'm trying to kind of find the balance between like sitting in a gothic horror versus looking like a rabbit in literal headlights. If you enjoyed my video today, please like and subscribe. You can also check out my other social medias, which are all just under Explain. I've actually started making memes.
Girl, get ready, they gonna meet me your ass to death, bitch. Wait, what does meme? You know how they meme
as Reels or TikToks on Instagram and TikTok respectively, and they also go by the username Explain, as I do here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a happy and healthy day, and I will see you in my next video.